Can you spot which one's the original EX2510 and which one's the new EX2510S? No, you'd be forgiven if you thought these monitors look exactly the same, because the only visual difference is this little S logo on the EX2510S. So the changes for the S version have been made under the hood. The question is though whether the EX2510S still is as good, even better, or actually worse than the original, which got a lot of praise from me and other reviewers. On paper at least, the S version appears to be a slight upgrade, as the refresh rate got a little bump from 144Hz to 165Hz. But this is not just the same monitor with a small overclock. The S version actually has a different panel, as I will show you in a bit. This makes the EX2510S effectively a new monitor, and I can already tell you that there are a few substantial differences between this and the original EX2510. I really don't want to talk about the ergonomics and design, because I've done that already in the review of the EX2510, and I will link that in the top right corner in case you want to know more about that. Now, there was a bit of a debate going on whether the panel of the S version still is the same with the slight overclock or if it's a new one. Luckily, I got access to the factory menu of both monitors, so I can now confirm the S version actually has a new panel. Both use a panel by AU Optronics, which according to the model number appear to be very similar. Though after my testing, I have to say that the new panel actually is a downgrade in a few areas and not as similar to the original panel as I would have hoped it to be. The first downgrade is the maximum brightness. The newer version is about 130 nits darker than the old one, and that's quite a significant hit actually. So the old version appears about 20% brighter than the new S version, that is using a formula for perceived luminance, which accounts for how our eyes perceive brightness differences. I'm really curious why BenQ decided to reduce the brightness of the newer version, because this actually is an artificial brightness cap. In HDR mode, the backlight pumps out almost 400 nits full screen, so I really don't understand why they decided to limit that and make the monitor worse than it could be. On the plus side, we still get the same above average contrast ratio. Above average for IPS, that is. But it's still good to see that BenQ have been able to maintain the contrast. And for you coating enthusiasts out there, the coating still looks very similar, if not the same. Though the original EX2510 was also known for its really good color accuracy without calibration. Now unfortunately, that's somewhat changed with the S version. For starters, the default settings are just ridiculous. The monitor defaults to the so-called RPG mode, which is over-sharpened, has a wonky gamma, and is overall just a weird choice for a default mode. The so-called standard mode, which previously was really good, is now replaced by the custom mode. And to make this a bit fairer for the S version, this is what we'll be using for comparison instead of the weird RPG mode. Still, it doesn't look good for the S version. Especially the gamma curve is pretty off, and overall it's just not as accurate as the original version. Luckily, BenQ provide an sRGB mode with the S version as well. This mode is just excellent with the original EX2510. With the S version though, it got a bit worse, but it's actually still decent. Especially the gamma curve is still almost perfect and worlds better than what we're getting in the other modes. I really wonder though why BenQ decided to reserve the almost perfect gamma curve for the sRGB mode. That's a bit of a shame, because the sRGB mode has a few settings grayed out, so we have to decide between a good gamma curve or various features. If you, for instance, want to use the color vibrance feature, backlight strobing, or just want to change the color temperature, well, bad luck, you have to use a different mode instead. Now, with a few tweaks, we can make the custom mode significantly better. And by using an ICC profile, we can even fix the gamma curve and make it look like it does in the sRGB mode. So if you don't mind putting in a bit of work, you can make the EX2510S look much better. After a full calibration, we get decent results, but even when calibrated, the S version does not perform as good as the original EX2510, which is a bit of a shame. One thing that's holding the S version back is the smaller color gamut volume. It only covers about 90% of the sRGB color space, which of course limits how accurate it can possibly be when displaying sRGB content. The original EX2510 isn't exactly a wide color gamut monitor, but with about 10 percentage points more color gamut volume, it looks a bit more saturated. Anyways, these are the settings I recommend using with the S version, and I highly recommend using the ICC profile on top of these settings. You can download that from the video description, and I link a guide on how to use it in the top right corner. This ICC is meant to be used with the custom mode and should not be used with the sRGB mode. Now let's talk about gaming related stuff. Just like the original EX2510, the S version has no official G-Sync certification. But in my testing, G-Sync works just as flawless as with the non-S version. There are no signs of flickering or any other defects. LFC kicks in at around 54 FPS and the transition is very smooth. But what about response times and ghosting and such? Well, as always, we'll be using Blur Buster's pursued camera technique to have a closer look. And what we're seeing here looks very good. In fact, this reminds me very much of the excellent response times performance of the non-S version. Just like with the non-S, AIM-A2 is the best overdrive mode and it works perfectly at every refresh rate. I'm not gonna go over every other overdrive mode, but in case you're interested, all the other UFO pictures will be available on my Patreon, which I will link in the video description. Now I'm especially interested in how the S and non-S version compare with their respective best modes, which is AIM-A2 for both. Unfortunately, they both look very similar. The S version has the slight edge when it comes to motion blur, thanks to the ever so slightly higher refresh rate. But when we compare them both at 144 Hz, they look absolutely identical. And that's great, because the performance we're seeing here still is among the fastest we can expect from an IPS display. Here's the also very fast G24F for some context. Now, when it comes to backlight strobing, the EX2510S does a pretty good job. Just like the non-S version, though the non-S managed to be slightly brighter while blur reduction is enabled. Still, everything over 200 nits can be considered very bright when we're talking about backlight strobing. So the S version definitely sits in a good spot here. Now let's come back to the initial question. Is the EX2510S an improved version of the EX2510 or not? Well, the short answer is no, it's actually not better than the original. In fact, the only thing that has been improved is the refresh rate, and that not even by much. Every other aspect has either gotten worse or stayed the same. Color-wise, the S version is a straight up downgrade. It's not as accurate anymore, the default settings are weird, and the color gamut volume has gotten smaller. Its color accuracy is by no means bad, and the sRGB mode still is way above average, but overall it's just not as excellent as the original EX2510 anymore. Though I'm glad that BenQ managed to keep the response times related stuff the same. So the EX2510S still is an excellent monitor for gaming, at least if you're not gaming in a very bright room, because the maximum brightness has been reduced quite significantly, and the S version now actually is one of the dimmest monitors of its class. So honestly, if you still got the chance to get the non-S version, there really is no point in getting the EX2510S instead. I'll link both versions down below. Thanks for watching, bis zum nächsten Video.